Focal bills the Mu-so Hekla as an elegant all-in-one system that fuses exceptional performance with effortless ease of use. Furthermore, it's designed to transform everyday moments into deeply immersive, emotion-filled experiences. Those are really big claims. So does the Hekla, which is named for an Icelandic mountain, deliver? Or is it just a big soundbar by another name? Let's find out. I'm Jenkins, and here on the Absolute Sounds YouTube channel, I review entry-level high-end products, as well as products that might appeal to listeners with real-world, often shared rooms. And really, what's more real-world friendly than a soundbar? Despite its form factor, the Focal Mu-so Hekla is really not a soundbar in any typical sense of the phrase. It's an all-in-one sound system, or maybe an all-in-one home cinema system, because this $3,600 slab of aluminum features 15 speakers, 660 watts of Class D amplification, built-in Wi-Fi and Ethernet, multi-channel DAC that supports numerous high-res formats, AirPlay and Bluetooth, UPnP, HDMI eARC and an optical digital input, a subwoofer output, and a streamer with support for Tidal, Qobuz, Spotify, and more. In addition, its frequency range extends from 20,000 Hz all the way down to 30 Hz, plus or minus 3 dB. Its maximum sound level is 108 decibels. If the Mu-so name sounds familiar, it's because the smaller name, not Focal, Mu-so has been around since 2015, with a second generation version arriving in 2019. Names Mu-so is a strictly stereo affair with 6 forward-firing drivers, but the basic look is the same. It's a wide, low, rectangular box with a rotary dial on top. British electronics firm Name and French speaker manufacturer Focal merged in 2011, and while the Hekla is a co-creation, it bears the Focal name to reflect the company's expertise in home cinema, and to that end is designed to support 7.1.2 channel Dolby Atmos. This means that in addition to 7 front-firing drivers, 3 6x3-inch woofers, 2 2¾ mid-ranges, and 2 1-inch tweeters. It also features 2 full-range drivers on each end and 4 full-range drivers on top. Those full-range drivers measure 1.5 by 2¾ inches and each receives 40 watts of power, as do each of the mids and tweeters. Each woofer gets 60 watts. As a result, the Hekla is significantly larger than the other Mu-so, measuring roughly 4.5 inches high, 11.5 inches deep, and 40 inches wide. It weighs 34 pounds, and while it can be moved around by one person, having only one set of hands makes it more difficult to avoid the surprisingly sharp heatsink that runs across the full width of the back. That heatsink, by the way, doubles as the Hekla's Wi-Fi antenna. If Focal brings the speaker expertise, it's Name that brings the electronics, in the form of its Pulse platform, which combines streaming and DSP functions. The latter include the Hekla's 5 listening modes and Adapt room correction software. Adapt, which first appeared on the $40,000 Focal Diva Utopia active wireless floor standing speakers, uses your phone or tablet's camera to find the distance to various points in your room. You can also enter these distances manually if desired, then runs those numbers through its algorithms and calibrates the output appropriately. The Hekla's rotary dial controls volume and allows you to switch between sources, but I used the Focal and Name app on my iPhone to control everything. The app, which coincidentally provides the best sound quality when streaming music, is how you configure Adapt, and while that function is defeatable, I never found a sonic reason to do so, and also how you select and customize the listening mode. 3 of the available 5 listening modes come from Dolby: Dolby Movie, Dolby Music, and Dolby Night, while the other 2, Sphere Movie and Sphere Music, were developed by Focal in name. While Dolby and Sphere do essentially the same thing, deciding which drivers do what in order to create the desired sound, they do it in different and very different sounding ways. According to Focal, the Sphere modes use beamforming and crosstalk cancellation to direct and balance different audio streams, some of which are bounced off the walls and ceilings, to create a wide sweet spot for multiple listeners in acoustically treated rooms up to 430 square feet. In contrast, the Dolby modes use binaural virtual spatialization technology to create a smaller, 2-person sweet spot, and it's ideal for larger and/or less acoustically treated spaces. Jumping back to the Hekla's connectivity for a moment, once you use the single HDMI input, typically for a TV, all that's left is the optical digital input, so you can't hook up a turntable or other analog device, and you may have to route things like a gaming console or an Apple TV through the television. Also, while there's a subwoofer output for an external active sub, you can set output level and crossover point, and the Hekla cuts the frequency range of its onboard woofers to match. There's no provision for separate surround speakers. And finally, one note about positioning the Hekla. The setup guide gives suggested distances from the front wall, listening position, and so on, including a minimum distance from the floor of about 10 inches. My IKEA cabinet is about 16 inches high, but as the stack of books probably suggests, in my room at least, the Hekla sounded its best higher still, at around 22 inches out of a suggested maximum of 27 inches. And for reference, my seated ear height is about 38 inches. I listened to the Focal Mu-so Hekla with an AudioQuest power conditioner, an AudioQuest HDMI cable connected to my TV, and 6 fat dots from Herbie's Audio Lab underneath to help with vibration. And that's it. Simplicity and lack of wires are big selling points here. All my music was streamed from Qobuz or Tidal, with the latter service offering an undisclosed, but reportedly in the thousands and growing daily, number of Atmos-encoded recordings. It's a bit challenging to describe the Hekla's sound because there's not really a default setting, or at least not one you'll probably want to use. After you've set up Adapt and chosen a listening mode, it's time to dig into the customization options for that mode. Sphere Music, for example, has a 3-band equalizer, bass, mid, and treble, on-off switches for loudness, upmixer, and dynamic range, plus sliders for voice-enhanced, surround, height, width, and low-frequency effects. So I set up the system to sound its best in my room using all the tools the Hekla had to offer. In addition, I set up the NAD C389 integrated amp, Golden Ear BRX bookshelf speakers, my least expensive pair of AudioQuest speaker cables, to have a somewhat similarly priced, it was around $4,000, not including the cables, traditional 2-speaker setup for context, both in terms of sound quality and value. I started listening in Sphere Music mode, and what immediately struck me was the overall sonic picture being very similar to that of the Class D Name CI Unity 102 streaming amplifier I reviewed last year. Specifically, Sphere Music delivers a very rich, very forward presentation. The overall sound is big and bold, there's real presence and physicality, as well as precise. The soundstage extended a few feet to the left and right and above the Hekla, although the sound space sometimes got a bit compressed, squeezing instruments and singers towards center stage. As promised, the sweet spot is very wide, essentially the full width of my couch, with excellent sonic coherence from every seating position. The Hekla's mid-range is clear and prominent, with accurate for the price range pitch and timbre of brass and wind instruments. Highs are slightly recessed, with cymbals ringing clearly but lacking a touch of shimmer and air. Bass performance is generally excellent, tactile, detailed, and powerful, with the acoustic bass in Cosmic Tone's Research Trios live at Public Records being reproduced with real accuracy and authority. But the lowest notes, while also generally tight and powerful, sometimes became disconnected, one-note style, from the rest of the music. This, however, was more a function of particular tracks rather than inherent character of the Hekla. And this is a good time to mention that I spent a fair amount of time tweaking the Hekla's listening modes because, more so than with any other system I've heard, the Focal really emphasized sonic differences between recordings. This was usually an issue with the bass. For instance, Prince's Purple Rain was completely completely overwhelmed by the synths, but the same track through the NAD golden ear combo kept things in much better balance. But not always. Adrian Lenker's voice in Real House sounded a bit thin and a touch dark with the EQ settings set to level. Adding a half decibel to the mid-range slider fleshed everything out nicely and brought her tone back up to what I had expected, but it wasn't long before another song would come along that sounded a touch too pronounced in the mid-range, and I had to go back in and flatten it out again. Anyway, overall detail is good, but as with the CI Unity, not great. The Hekla smooths off nuance, those tiny cues that help make recordings sound natural. And as I said in my review of the CI Unity, while I never felt like the musicians were in the room, I did get clean, dynamic, sonically cohesive, and enjoyable musical reproduction. So that's the sound when using Sphere Music, in which I should note that Atmos-encoded tracks sounded better than non-Atmos ones. Switching to Dolby Music, particularly with Atmos-encoded tracks, swung the Hekla sound more toward what I usually hear in my room. The noise floor was lower, presentation was less forward and less rich, but offered tighter bass control and improved top-to-bottom coherence. A wider, taller, and especially deeper soundstage with better sound staging and more air around instruments, and improved dynamic response and musicality. At its best, the sound was shockingly good for emerging from something that looks like a soundbar, and startlingly close in many attributes to the performance of the C389 and BRX combo. The difference between Sphere Music and Dolby Music isn't subtle, and the latter is unquestionably the more accurate choice. It's the audiophile mode compared to Sphere's music lover mode. But while I preferred the Dolby Music sound overall, I did find myself regularly switching back and forth based on music, mood, or situation. While Dolby Music produced the best results, the Hekla couldn't quite match the nuance, ease, and sense of naturalness of the NAD and golden ear combination. Overall, though, the Focal acquitted itself very well, even besting the traditional system when it came to low noise floor, vocal clarity, and bass depth and impact. In Dolby Music mode, their sound stages were virtually identical in size, with the Focals being noticeably deeper. Finally, I wanted to touch on the Hekla's performance with movies and TV, and in a word Focal loves to use, it was immersive. My few discontents with its musical performance mattered not at all in the home cinema realm, where, I'll admit, my standards are lower, and its low-frequency performance was excellent. Dialogue was usually crisp and clear, certainly better than that of any amp and two-speaker setup I've heard in my room, and if it wasn't, the voice enhance function resolved that quickly. The Hekla couldn't deliver the full surround experience of a 5 or 7 channel separate system, of course, but the soundstage was almost as large as that of any bookshelf speakers I've heard in my room, and more important, the Hekla helped draw me into the on-screen action or drama. In this arena, the Focal was simply more enjoyable than the NAD golden ear combination. The Focal Mu-so Hekla is a seriously impressive achievement. Before hearing it, I never would have believed the scale and sound quality it produces. In addition, it's simple to install and set up. It's a natural for pairing with a TV. It's very versatile in terms of customizing the sound to your liking, and the difference between Dolby Music and Sphere Music is almost like having 2 separate systems to switch between, and it takes up very little real estate aside from whatever piece of furniture you place it on. In terms of its $3,600 price tag, I think the Hekla offers good value for the sound quality on offer, and throughout my time with it, I wondered whether, if form factor wasn't an issue, could this all-in-one speaker be a legitimate alternative to a traditional 2-channel setup of the same price? And ultimately, in my room, I think it is. While the NAD golden ear combination, which cost about 20% more when you include the speaker cables, delivered better overall sound, particularly when it came to low-level details and a sense of realism, the overall difference was fairly small. And if this sounds intriguing and you want to audition one, you'll find the Hekla exclusively at Focal powered by name dealers.